The Andy Griffith Show has been one of my series favorites, watched on syndicated television. In my opinion, the first 5 years were classics. And one of the most favorite episodes is the Pickle story. Andy and Barney conspire to avoid eating more of Aunt Bee's terrible pickles, known as kerosene cucumbers, while sparing her feelings. Though the episode is over 60 years old, I found little discussion about why it's funny. Sure, you'll read comments from lifelong fans that either love the episode or sincerely wonder why it ranks so high. So, I'm going to take a crack, overanalyze this episode, and share my theories why the Pickle story is comedy gold. Now keep in mind that comedy and what makes you laugh are not always synonymous. There's different types of humor. The Pickle story surprisingly takes advantage of several. You'll find comic relief, absurdist humor, slapstick, incongruity, distressed humor, and a running gag. Before I begin, like, share, or subscribe if you end up enjoying this content and want to see more like it. Now, let's take a bite out of the Pickle story. Aunt Bee's kitchen. Aunt Bee stands near her kitchen table with jars everywhere. They're overflowing with pickles in both the foreground and back. Clara Johnson helps herself inside, carrying a brown paper bag. The first thing the opening scene does happens before Clara appears. That is reinforcing the image of Aunt Bee as a home cook. With Clara, the episode gives her a backstory as a champion pickle maker, while making her look a little conceited. It also retcons Bee somewhat, having her participate and lost at the county fair contest for the past 11 years. The first joke is a running one, of suffering Aunt Bee's pickles. Without being spoon-fed, the comedy behind the pickle comes with an audio cue, and the sour look on Clara's face. The audio cue comes with a distinctive sound of a ratchet, and it's not always present. This is an example of distressed humor, where we laugh at someone else's expense that's not permanently damaging. An example of distressed humor is when someone slips on a banana peel. It's normally funny if not cliché. However, if the person cracks their head and is severely injured, that's not funny. Another element of comedy here is the use of incongruity. From the series' first episode of its first season, Aunt Bee is established as a good cook. However, in the episode, without much of a backstory, the character of Aunt Bee has been rewritten, or as I describe sometimes, bending the lore, where a character trait is tweaked, and in this case, introducing a flaw. The incongruity comes with Aunt Bee's reputation as a cook and the terrible cucumbers she manufactures. Bending the lore can work in small doses, and best only in comedies. Audiences can only put up with so much change in beloved characters. Clara gives a long-winded advice to Bee how to make her pickles better. It's clever as it plays up her antagonistic personality, misleading the audience into thinking she's the foil, the villain. Her checklist also details just how bad the pickles are, scientifically speaking. The scene ends with a very subtle message. It comes with Aunt Bee's nonverbal gestures, brushing off Clara's rather blunt critique. She is going to go ahead and make these stinkers. It's a sign of the absurdist humor that will come. The Courthouse. Andy sits behind his desk while Barney stands near the filing cabinet. Both are shuffling papers. Andy sings to himself, and Barney joins the chorus. Andy silently thinks to himself how terrible Barney's singing is. Bee visits to give Andy and Barney lunch. Her presentation comes with the rule of 3, as she presents roast beef, coleslaw, and homemade pickles. If you're not familiar with the rule of 3 in comedy, just think the 3 Little Pigs, where the third of 3 is always absurd. Speaking of absurd, we're told Aunt Bee made 8 quarts. That's 2 gallons of pickles. It puts a number to the severity of the joke and sets the stakes of the episode. Bee's presentation is almost professional, more like magical, as she pulls the cloth off the bowl. Instead of a disappearing act, it's dark magic, as she has the cucumbers appear. We hear the audio cue without the ratchet. Aunt Bee taunts the men with pickles, pretty much guilting them to eat in front of her. It's a humorous, if not awkward situation, but it builds empathy with Andy and Barney. How many of us have found ourselves in a similar situation where we had to eat it up and live a white lie not to hurt a loved one's feelings? What makes the scene work is the tension. It comes with Andy and Barney's fruitless efforts to get out of it, but there's absurdity in Bee. She's oblivious to the lack of quality and danger her cucumbers pose. She stands there, steepling her fingers like a cartoon villain.
Excellent.
Andy and Barney take a bite. We hear the cue again. The running gag continues. Aunt Bee leaves. Barney tells a fly to shoo, but it's dead. This is my favorite moment of the episode. We're laughing at the dead fly. It's absurdist again. The pickles doubles as insecticide. We come to the conclusion of the first act, where Andy comes up with the plot of the episode, his plan to switch the homemade pickles with store-bought. The men put their pickles on the desk. We hear the audio cue again. Andy's kitchen. Andy, Barney, and Opie stand in the kitchen with jars of Aunt Bee's pickles on the table. Barney puts store-bought pickles next to them. Andy gives an obligatory father-son talk to Opie, how playing this prank on Bee is not normal. But Opie replies he understands because they don't want to hurt Aunt Bee's feelings, and he doesn't want to get sick again. What makes this moment humorous is the presumed lore or backstory shared that Opie had been physically sick from Aunt Bee's pickles. The running gag started well before the episode. The other clever element is having a moment of seriousness followed by humor. Deceiving a loved one as a fool is not humorous. Andy tells us this, but then comes Opie's joke that makes us forgive.
Because we don't want to hurt Aunt Bee's feelings, and you don't want me to get sick again.
This is called Bathos, and if you're not familiar with Bathos, just watch anything and everything made by Josh Whedon.
You're gonna get heartburn. Get it? Heartburn? That's it.
Barney tries to exit the house through the back door. In his attempt to avoid Aunt Bee, he runs into her anyway. Another example of incongruity. When Bee asks what's with the suitcase, Barney starts making up a story. We laugh at his predicament, but it gets worse as Barney just won't shut up and leave. An example of absurdist humor. But Andy shoves Barney out, who is still in the middle of a loud conversation. We get a little physical humor, slapstick, as Barney gets his arm stuck in the doorway. Outdoors, speed trap. Barney stands on the road running through Mayberry. He flags down an approaching car and speaks to the driver. We see what happens to the pickles when Barney hands them out as safe driving awards. There is both absurdity and incongruity here. The absurdity comes with the abject cruelty, handing out fly-killing cucumbers to visitors passing through Mayberry. The local law enforcement, instead of stopping unsafe motorists with tickets, they stop safe drivers for pickles. Andy's dining room. Barney joins the Taylor family for dinner. The meal includes a plate full of pickles. After Barney sidesteps Aunt Bee's question about his non-trip to his cousin's house, Aunt Bee announces her batch of pickles would be her last. However, after seeing how much her family loves her pickles, she has a change of heart. She takes a bite out of her own, the store-bought pickles. She changes her mind and decides to enter the contest using commercially made pickles. The comedy of irony hits home. Andy and Barney's plan backfires, and they would have been better off doing nothing. I found humor that Aunt Bee can't recognize her own cooking or tell the differences from her recipe, which is bad, and store-bought, which are 10 times better, even 100. Another example of absurdity. The plot twist makes us believe the conflict in the story is now the pretentious Clara versus Aunt Bee. It may very well be the result of black and white television, but I want to talk about Aunt Bee at the dinner table. She sits in front of her wallpaper and blends in like a chameleon. The wallpaper pattern is very similar to her dress. Is she part of the house, or is the house part of her? We see she's finished with dinner, but there's more than enough bread and pickles. I'm sure many of you are saying, Mr. G, they're just props, and they needed to fill the space on the table. I'm going to say you're likely right. But it's also a hint of Aunt Bee's propensity to overcook. And it looks to me that nobody likes her cornbread either, not even herself. The Courthouse. Andy and Barney discuss the fallout of their plan and the consequences of having Aunt Bee winning a fixed pickle contest. Clara Johnson walks inside with her jar of homemade pickles. Barney talks himself out eating another pickle, but Andy reluctantly accepts a taste of Clara's. We expect something when Andy takes a bite, but little happens other than a pleasant reaction. The audience is left hanging and wants a joke. This is when Clara, who walks around Mayberry with a scrapbook in her bag, explains how much comfort her pickle making brings her since her husband passed away. She is not the foil she was made out to be, but a vulnerable old woman. Andy tells Barney the contest must be fair and square, and they have to be seen eating all of the remaining pickles. Andy's plan pins hope that Aunt Bee will have to make a new batch and enter the contest with the pickles she made. We come to a montage of the family going through the rest of the 8 quarts to the glowing reaction of Aunt Bee. Listen to the music as it descends from energetic and uplifting to exhausted. The Courthouse. Andy and Barney are quiet, looking uneasy if not constipated. Aunt Bee rushes in with lunch. Andy and Barney fret. More pickles are coming. Aunt Bee tells she's out of pickles and has none to enter the contest with. She explains to Andy and to the viewers how it would be an embarrassment if she didn't enter. Andy puts the idea in Bee's head to hurry and make another batch. Aunt Bee gets all giddy and excited. While Andy's plan worked out and the conflict is resolved, we still have a pickle contest to watch. The county fair. It's a cool and windy day at the fair, but visitors still enjoy the carnival rides, livestock shows, and a certain pickle contest inside the canned foods pavilion. We get another shot of food abundance. It's either the table of pickle jars or the cakes in the background. Wonderful use of subliminal imagery. This is the epicenter of grandstanding. The seriousness of the contest from the hushed anticipation of the audience can't be overlooked. There is even canned laughter when the judges give their observations. When the judges take a bite of Bee's pickles, there are no audio cues. We just get the disgusted look on the judges' faces, and probably the best, most memorable description.
What would you say? Kerosene?
Precisely.
We're laughing at the pickles and the absurdity that those cucumbers shared a stage with the others. Clara Johnson is declared winner, which brings final resolution to a literal applause. This is the comic relief, seeing Clara win the contest honestly, as well as preserving Aunt Bee's dignity. Clara wants to congratulate the judges, but Barney says they're out at the fountain washing their hands. A very clever joke postscript, since it's done off camera. It gives the illusion that the terribleness of the pickles reached outside the borders of our television and permeates through the fairgrounds. But we're not done with the punchline. Aunt Bee tells Andy and Barney she made 16 quarts of her pickles. She said it with so much confidence it borderlines insane arrogance and walks off with Opie. Andy turns to the table of pickles. True, only one jar, number 11, is Aunt Bee's, but it's part of a larger image. The jars of pickles represent their future. It's nothing but pickles, cucumbers, kerosene flavored. Andy and Barney will learn to love them. Andy's kitchen. It's morning. Andy reads his newspaper and pours himself a cup of coffee. Barney helps himself inside. Barney takes a piece of toast, opens the lid to a cup of preserves. The men smell something funny. Barney asks questions. Is it modeling glue? A gas leak? No. It's the marmalade. The morning after Aunt Bee stayed up in the kitchen cooking and reformulating ammonia. Listen when Andy peeks open the glass dish of marmalade. There is another audio cue. Instead of a ratchet, we hear a bell. When they go over to the cupboard, they discover Aunt Bee's stockpile of ammonia jelly. The audio cue for the cucumbers return, but this time with a bell. The episode has its bookends. Back where we started, Aunt Bee didn't learn a thing, and her terrible cooking is well preserved. What do you think? Is the Pickle story a favorite episode of yours? Let me know in the comments below. This is Mr. G of Synergy saying, in trying times, who couldn't use a jar of pickles? Here's to preserving your health and holidays.